When you have 10 assistant coaches available to a college football program, I find it interesting the way that some coaches structure their staffs, right? Like you look at some of the ways that it's set up, and some guys, some programs are set up that they want the most X's and O's, boy genius football guys on their staff. Some guys want the best recruiters they can find. Some guys want a mix of both. And I think one of the underutilized slots, because when you have 10 assistant coaching positions, you can have a special teams coordinator if you want a special teams coordinator. You can have an inside and outside wide receivers coach if you want. You can have a safeties and a cornerbacks coach if that's how you want to structure it. So I find the way that it's structured super interesting pretty frequently, because you find out who puts emphasis on what. If you have a special teams coordinator, you know that your program values making sure your punt unit, your field goal unit, your kickoffs are really good. If you run an offense like Tennessee does or like Mike Leach did, and the outside wide receivers are so drastically different from inside wide receivers, you can have that luxury. If you want to lump your tight ends with your offensive line, and the offensive line coach coaches the tight ends as well, you know that you're probably not getting an explosive, game-changing tight end playmaker from that position. So I think you can read a lot into the way some staffs are structured. And I think one of the underutilized slots when you have 10 position coaches is the former star, or the former the famous alumni. And the reason I bring it up is today Ohio State announced that they had moved James Laurinaitis to an official on-field. He's going to be the linebackers coach for the Buckeyes. And James Laurinaitis, being the linebackers coach for Ohio State, is going to be a somewhat of a big deal on the recruiting trail, right? It's not a new thing by any stretch of the imagination. Hell, Jim Harbaugh, back when he was still playing in the NFL, was listed as a quote-unquote assistant coach under his dad at Western Kentucky, right? Because you can go to recruits and say, hey, listen, my son is an NFL quarterback, and he's going to help you. He's going to tutor you. You're going to learn from him. And that's a recruiting sales pitch. So this isn't a new thing by any stretch of the imagination, but it just came to the forefront today with James Laurinaitis that I think it's an underutilized spot on a coaching staff, because when push comes to shove, do you need 10 assistant coaches who are spectacular recruiters? Probably, in a lot of cases. Now, part of the recruiting help there is name recognition. If James Laurinaitis is going to come into some high school linebacker's house, sit now a mom and pop and tell him, hey, I'm going to do whatever I can to get your kid to the league, it's going to mean a lot, because James Laurinaitis was a high-profile college football linebacker and played in the NFL at a high level for a really long time. It helps that his dad was, a WWE superstar back in the day. But his name recognition is going to mean something. And I realize this is it takes two to tango, right? Like, if Tim Tebow isn't interested in being the quarterback's coach at Florida, which you might not want Tim Tebow to be your quarterback's coach at Florida. If anybody has ever seen you throw and then immediately said, are you sure you're left-handed? You might not want that guy being the guy to lead your mechanics, but that's neither here nor there. It takes two to tango. So you have to have guys that want to do that. But if former players show any interest in being a position coach, and it probably just depends on the level, but Warren Sapp being on the staff at Colorado is going to go a long way to some of those, some recruits that you can point to, like, hey, Warren freaking Sapp is going to teach you how to play defensive line. Now, the flip side is I think you got to kind of thread the needle of somebody that is still also relevant to kids who are turning 17, 18 in 2024. Like, and it will constantly, like, blow my mind that There are kids graduating college that weren't alive when 9/11 happened. Like, I'm not that old, but there are kids graduating college that weren't alive when 9/11 happened. So to kids turning 17 or 18, they might have to pull up, like, search Warren Sapp on YouTube. But when they find it, they will see, like, holy cow, this guy was a beast back in the 1900s, which is a hell of a statement. And so James Laurinaitis carries a little bit more relevancy, and even to some of the recruits right now might be like, okay, now I was told you were good back in my dad told me you were really good back in the day, or whatever. So there's a couple of needles that needed to be thread between, relevancy, recency, and name recognition. But there's a reason Deion Sanders is successful, because his name recognition immediately made him credible. If Deion Sanders didn't have a Hall of Fame career, like, you can't hire somebody with no college football coaching experience at Jackson State without the name recognition and credibility that Deion Sanders immediately brings. And it's like Ed Reed was hired as the head coach at Bethune-Cookman before leaving after a month. Eddie George hired as the head coach at Tennessee State with no college football coaching experience. The reason you can do that is because you have name recognition, and that name recognition is immediate credibility. Now, I would say hiring a head coach in that situation is maybe a bit of a leap, but a position coach, if somebody wanted to hire Eddie George to be their running backs coach, who's going to say no to that? Might he not be the best running back teacher in America? No, but you know what? You can trot that guy into some households. Like, hey, here's pictures of me winning the Heisman Trophy. Here's me playing in the Super Bowl. Here's me being on the cusp of NFL MVP. It's going to carry weight with kids. And when you are constantly trying to find an edge wherever you can in recruiting, whether it be NIL, whether it be facilities, playing time, uniforms, whatever the case may be, saying this guy who won the Heisman Trophy, or in Warren Sapp's case, like this guy who had a dominant NFL career, or in James Laurinaitis' case, like this guy who was a decorated college football player, Deion Sanders, Pro Football Hall of Famer. When you have those accolades and you can show those to kids, having that advantage is huge. It's gigantic. Anytime you can find an edge, you have to do it. And I think even if you're just being in a situation like, so Tom Brady is going to join the Fox NFL top booth for 2024, right? And part of his deal is not just being an analyst. Part of his deal is like, hey, Tom, we need you to go golfing with sponsors and shake some hands and kiss some babies and go to these fundraisers and all of those. And like, they're going to pay him $37 million a year to do it. Like, it's worth it to him. But if you can turn a former All-American or a former super famous alumni who's from your football program into a guy who maybe isn't the best. And believe me, I think there are some positions where, like, you need a quarterback's coach. You need an offensive lineman. You need an offensive line coach. You need an offensive and defensive coordinator. But at running back, is your running back coach or your linebacker coach, where it's not like the entire success of your program rests on the position coaches in those. If you can be a guy who can go into homes, get kids to come to your program, but then at the same time, you can go to fundraising dinners and hobnob, and people and boosters are excited to see, like, holy cow, James Laurinaitis is here. Deion Sanders is here. Eddie George is here. Warren Sapp is here. If you can go in, shake some hands, kiss some babies, get people separated from their money to help your program, that's just as important as it is to find and develop kids at your position group. When you have 10 on-field assistants, you have a little bit of wiggle room to play with. And believe me, there are some programs that have that luxury more than others, right? Like, you can you can get away with it at a Power 5 program when you're pulling in 5-star linebackers that you don't have to necessarily develop those guys that other programs have to find 3-star linebackers and develop them into 5-star players. So there is a bit of like a luxury tax that you're paying for this. But I think if you are one of those top 5, top 10, 15 programs in America, if just say, for instance, if Julio Jones says like, hey, I would love to come back to Alabama and be the wide receivers coach, we're going to find a spot on the staff for you. You have to. If Robert Griffin III says, hey, I want to be the quarterback coach at Baylor, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do that then. Like, there are just some people that have the stature, the name recognition, where that matters, where you can point to them and say, hey, I played this game at a really high level. I'd like to teach you how to do it too. And that's going to carry some weight. Because if you're just a run-of-the-mill coach who I've never really heard of as a linebackers coach, and you're recruiting against James Laurinaitis, or you're a defensive line coach, and maybe I haven't ever heard of you, but you've produced some good players. And then immediately following you, Warren Sapp comes in the house and starts his recruiting pitch. It's just going to carry more weight. It's going to have more heft to it. It is immediate credibility. And if you're a program looking for immediate credibility, you're probably a program who's also looking for an immediate advantage in recruiting. And again, I realize it's easier said than done. I realize it's easier than just being like, hey, if Clinton Dix wants to come back and be our DB's coach, or whatever the case may be, I don't have a great. If Aaron Donald wants to be the defensive line coach at Pitt, guess what? We're going to go ahead and do that. J.J. Watt says, hey, you know what? I think I'd like to coach the D line at Wisconsin. Who the hell are you to say like, nah, actually, the guy we've got right now is doing a great job. We're really proud of it. You find a spot on your staff for somebody who's going to pack a punch like that. And I think when you have those 10 assistant slots to deal with, you can make that up in other areas, right? Like if you decide whether you want a special teams coordinator or however you want to structure your staff, if you reserve one of those spots for like, hey, celebrity, this guy's just going to be our closer. That, by the way, when we think we're getting ready to get a kid inked to a verbal commitment, we can bring in this guy, or we can bring that guy into booster meetings. We can bring him to fundraisers and all, and award galas and all of those things. I don't think it's a bad way to use one of your 10 assistant jobs. It's just finding the right person who wants to be kind of hoard out. And it's like, essentially you're asking like, hey, in exchange for me teaching a little bit of football, can I use you as a prostitute? It is essentially the transaction at the end of the day. And finding somebody who's okay with that might be a little easier said than done. But when those people present themselves, one, I think it only helps college football because kind of bringing those legends back into the game. If Barry Sanders is like, hey, you know what? I think I want to coach running backs at Oklahoma State. Like, all that does is bring more nostalgia, more eyeballs, because the more people familiar are with every aspect of the game, the more invested they're going to be. And all it does is become better for college football in the long run. So that's my diatribe for today. If you got somebody who wants to be on your coaching staff, I think you find a way to make it happen if they've got enough cachet. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you are watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great content we're pumping out here on Saturday Glory. If you are listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. Back at it on Sunday here on the Daily Huddle with Saturday Glory.